I was one woman in a team of about 70 men. I'd never seen any form of flexible working role modeled apart from maybe somebody leaving at 5 if they had something that they had to do after market close. I was going to the office, 5-6 days a week, and I was getting sicker and sicker. It was to the point where probably about once a week I physically couldn't walk.
So instead of letting you work from home 1 day a week, they instead fired you?
Yeah, paid me to leave here.
Wow. Welcome to The Slowdown, your time to define success and growth on your own terms with a little inspiration from others. We're back at Brazen Studios in London Bridge with my next guest, Molly Johnson-Jones, who came here to share her remarkable story. Molly's autoimmune condition can cause pain so severe that she's unable to walk. But after asking her workplace to work from home on those occasions, she was fired. This led her to co-found the company Flexa in 2019. Flexa is a jobs platform where companies get discovered for their working environments, cultures, and where job applicants can access transparent information about those options, allowing you to find a job that works around your needs and can help you slow down. This conversation was so eye-opening, and I can't wait for you to dive in. Hi, Molly. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, let me try to best summarize what it is that you've created. You're the CEO of Flexa, which is a platform that showcases companies offering flexible working environments. The platform generates millions of data points on current and future of work trends, and it's relied upon by over 3 million workers globally, as well as companies like Mars, Microsoft, and TUI Group. In doing so, you've also raised awareness and advocacy for transparency in the workplace. Do you ever stop to process the impact of what you've created?
Very rarely. It's actually probably the one time of year every year that I do, because we have in late Q1 of every year, we do the Flexa Awards for our companies where we look at their achievements based on different elements of their EVP. So culture, diversity, flexibility, and that's all voted for by their employees. So we bring 250 people together to celebrate the company achievements, and having everybody in one room, that makes me think about the impact of what has actually happened, and it's bonkers to see.
Wow. And who do you do it for?
It was driven by probably my own experience and seeing how problematic the lack of transparency in the job hunting process was. And I think that has then evolved into probably a wider mission, more to try to change the industry in a small way. Never going to be able to change it in a massive way, given the massive players that exist. But it's more of a mission to do what I think is right, in the sense of making sure that everybody can make an educated decision about whether a company is right for them or not, rather than being taken through, 7 interviews, then off a stage, and all of a sudden you're told, no, you can't possibly work from home 1 day a week, or you can't possibly work those kind of flexible hours to drop kids off in the morning, or to be able to take your dog for a walk, whatever it is that you need. And I think that lack of information was so disempowering for me early in my career. And there are millions of other people where that is absolutely the case.
And as you say, in the interview process, when feels like the right time to be like, oh, by the way, can I have this exemption? Whereas if there is a platform that you can filter for that, then that's super useful. I always like to start very much from the start. Where were you raised, and by whom, and what did your childhood look like?
So I was born in London. Then I moved to Somerset when I was about 7. And then moved back to London when I was about 18. I was raised by my mum. She's a single mum. She had me at 19. And then my 3 siblings came along when I was 13. And then my youngest sister when I was 19. So big age difference. I thought that my mum had ruined my life when she first told me that she was pregnant when I was 13. But no, it's been wonderful to go from having almost the experience of an only child to then having siblings. And I now live down in Devon.
Were there any early examples of success that you saw, that you looked up to and felt like, this is what success looks like?
Yeah, my granddad was a very successful architect, and he went to Oxford. He was the only person in my family actually to go to Oxbridge, only the second person in my family to go to uni. From at the age of about 5, he would always ask me, am I going to go to Oxford, or am I going to go to Cambridge? And that was the kind of natural assumption. And I remember being asked that question so many times later on in my childhood, and decided when I was 16 that I was going to go into investment banking and earn loads of money, because I didn't see that in the majority of my family. There wasn't an enormous amount of wealth at all. Sometimes things were a little bit of a struggle, and I saw education as an opportunity to change that.
Yeah, I think the UK education system is a curious one. I remember, so I moved here from Serbia, and when somebody started to talk about Oxbridge as a concept, I thought that was a third completely separate university. I thought there was Oxford, Cambridge, and then this place called Oxbridge. It took me ages to like realize what was going on. And I'd gone to a kind of inner city comprehensive state school for my GCSEs, and then I went to quite a good, still state, but very like selective and prestigious sixth form. And in sixth form, that was the first time I'd ever heard of Oxbridge and the idea of going there. And there was very much a do or die attitude at my school of like the desperation with which the students like really wanted to get in. Have you like unpacked at all the importance of why you wanted to go to Oxford? Because I understand that you applied, you didn't get in the first year, you then took a year out, a sort of gap year, and then reapplied. Have you like since then looked back and gone like, why did I care so much about going specifically to this college?
Yes and no. I think with the way that I kind of look at life and achievements, I've always been a very achievement-driven person. It's like I'll pick a thing and then that is what I have to succeed in. Whether that was deciding one day that I was going to do a half Ironman, going to Oxford, like I'll just pick something. So I think to some extent, it was that. I saw that as the achievement that I had to achieve. And if I didn't go, then that was failure, which was obviously ridiculous. There were plenty of other brilliant universities or brilliant career pathways without university to go through. But for me, that was what I wanted to achieve. And even though I didn't get in the first time, I still thought I would. Like I still had that confidence behind it of thinking that I would get in. And I think there was also part of me and part of my family as well that saw how much of an advantage it gave my grandfather. And I think for my mum, she saw education as the most important start that she could have given me in life. Like she became a teacher so that she could get me into private school more cheaply than when I went on to secondary. She literally moved around the country to get me into somewhere where I'd have a scholarship. So it felt like a natural continuation of that and sort of showing her that I valued it just as much as she did.
Yeah, you saw the success in your grandfather and you thought, that's what success looks like and that's the route that you have to take to get there. Yeah. And also, I guess, beyond your family, the external validation, right, of culture says this is the best place you can go in the UK. And you achieved that. So there was a real sense of pride.
Yeah, exactly that.
And also, while you were at university, you discovered that you had an autoimmune condition. How did you learn about that?
So it started when I was about 18 and I had absolutely no idea what was going on. Like my hands would swell up, my feet would swell up. I'd get like covered in hives. My face would swell up. So sometimes I like basically couldn't open my eyes, couldn't walk. And it would appear for like a month or so of being really bad, then it would disappear again. And then once I got to my final year, it was so bad to the extent that like there would be 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks where I could barely get out of bed. So I ended up like not being able to go to lectures, missing a lot of tutorials. And I remember being told that they can't force you to, but heavily suggesting that I drop out and try again. Next, like do my finals the following year. And again, I think it was another one of those things of like, I saw that as failure and was like, absolutely no way. So I kind of carried on through, you know, working in bed and eventually got through. And I promised myself that if I went to Oxford, I was going to get a first. And that all looked really in jeopardy. But thankfully managed to kind of pull through and pull it off. But dealing with that amount of stress and trying to do your finals and trying to get a first when you basically are bedridden was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even begin to kind of express how hard doing a degree at Oxford is. I remember in my sixth form when they were like, come and see some universities. And I went to Warwick and Durham and UCL and LSE and King's. And I would ask them, you know, how I wanted to study history. You did geography, right? So sort of similar-ish humanities subjects. And I said, you know, how many essays are you doing a week or a month or whatever? And they were like, oh, it's about, you know, 3 essays a term. And that's kind of it, really. And then you do an exam per subject at the end of the year. And so there's like 3 or 4 exams and that's kind of it. And then I went to Oxford for the open day for, I think it was English literature. And they said, yeah, we're doing an essay a week.
Yeah. Sometimes 2.
Sometimes 2. You're expected to read several books a week. And this was for English literature. I was like, don't sign me up. I was just like, wow, I thought I was supposed to have a life in my teen years. So I went to UCL and I opted for I want to live in London. I don't want that level of workload. So massive kind of recognition of how difficult that degree was on top of, compared to like most other UK degrees, on top of what you were going through is so commendable. Or is it commendable? Like you kind of put your kind of health at risk there.
Yeah, and I did. Like, I got worse as a result of that. Like, stress is one known contributor to autoimmune diseases flaring up. So is lack of sleep. So is lack of exercise. And in order to get through it, I had to kind of lean into those three things. But I also, as much as I think putting too much pressure on yourself is bad, and sometimes you do have to give yourself a break, I also do see massive advantage in the sort of yin and yang of life, and sometimes going through really difficult periods of time, not least because you can show yourself what you can actually do. But I think also it helps you to appreciate when things are easier and better as well.
Yeah, the ebbs and flows are super important. I think, I'm conscious of what I just said because I play into the pattern that I'm so used to of capitalist culture of like, wow, you did this like ridiculously hard thing at the expense of your health. And like, I applaud you for it, right? And like, maybe we shouldn't do that. But I also agree that hard work also like begets kind of doing well. So you then enter the world of work.
Yeah. And
about 2.5 years later, you're working in a corporate job and your autoimmune condition flares up again. Is there a name for the condition?
They don't really know.
Okay.
It's linked to PCOS and linked to some form of connective tissue disorder, but they don't know what is and isn't one and the other, basically.
Right. And so that flares up again, and you requested what?
To be able to work from home 1 day a week, which in that industry was massive. I was one woman in a team of about 70 men. I'd never seen any form of flexible working role modeled apart from maybe somebody leaving at 5 if they had something that they had to do after market close. I was going to the office 5-6 days a week, and I was getting sicker and sicker. Again, it was to the point where probably about once a week I physically couldn't walk. And I was trying to juggle that. But I ended up having to take quite a lot of sick days, which I obviously otherwise didn't want to do. Sometimes I could get in by cycling, so I didn't have to walk, or wearing slippers on my commute was another one. But somebody spotted it, the fact that I was struggling. And I assume it was well intended. I don't, want to see the best in people. I don't know. And then it was mentioned that I could request to work from home 1 day a week, but there's obviously a whole process in large corporates. So I was sent to an occupational health therapist who suggested that I be classified as disabled because of the severity of what was going on. And thank God he did, because then obviously it's a protected characteristic. Otherwise they could have just got rid of me whenever they wanted to, but they had to settle because it wasn't working for them to let me work from home, or the idea of letting me work from home 1 day a week.
So instead of letting you work from home 1 day a week, they instead fired you effectively?
Yeah, paid me to leave. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you mentioned there was working in an incredibly male-dominated corporate world where masculine ideas of success and competition are rife. How do you look back on that time?
So I was thinking about this the other day because I reflected about 2 years ago when I was writing something for International Women's Day. I look back as quite from a point of being a true feminist, of feeling quite guilty about that period of time. I think to your point of the ideas of competition, I almost felt proud of the fact that I had got there as the only woman against, a lot of societal odds.
Kind of elbowed your way in, which is the
Yeah, exactly.
culture.
And I sort of saw that as like I've survived. Other people could too. They're just not working hard enough, or they're not committed enough. Yeah. When obviously it is significantly more complicated than that. And ultimately it starts from the day before we're born as to whether or not environments like that are set up for women to be able to thrive. But I think I saw it as almost like a badge of honor until it was gone. And then I realized actually I'm by far not the only person that this world isn't made for. And that is why it was so hard to get into. And some of the things that you see where like team socials end up at a strip club and I'd be like, I'm going home. There was a lot of, bravado, and you're just assumed to be one of the lads as a woman. You're assumed that you're just going to sort of become one of the men, and it doesn't matter that you've had a totally different life experience. So I look back on it with, it's quite a complicated time, and I think it shaped enormously how I look at the world and how I look at how we get to gender equality. But I definitely look back on it with guilt as well.
Yeah, because this kind of idea of having to win in the workplace being such a prevalent thing, of course, puts so many people at the back foot. And you know, if you're a woman with children, you want to leave early. And then this idea that like a younger woman who wants to like elbow her way through is going to be like, well, I'll work more hours or longer hours. I'll stay later and I'll do better. Yeah. It's like that culture of winning and staying at the office later. Mm-hmm. What can we do about that?
I think it's fundamentally rooted in the idea that we're measuring the wrong things. That commitment to being good at your job is about how long you stay at the office, how much you can weather in a way, and how much you can put up with. And then, you know, after 10 years of doing that, suddenly you are the one that is able to leave the office before everybody else, and you're paid significantly for your time. But it's about sort of 5 to 10 years of just surviving. And I think we're really measuring the wrong things, and we should be looking at output fundamentally and people's impact on our business, not their willingness to endure a rather nonsensical culture. And if we start looking at outputs and impacts, then we do begin to, it's not the answer, but we begin to level the playing field for people that may not be able to work a 14-hour day or come into the office every day. We start to actually recognize their input and impact.
Totally. There's a quote that I come back to so often in my life by the classical historian Mary Beard, which is that if women are not perceived to be fully within the structures of power, surely it is power we need to redefine rather than women. And I think, that always kind of brings me back to this idea of like, we have to be redefining the power structures. And as you say, looking at output rather than just the number of hours that we're spending doing on a task in order to make real change. And so how did you feel after that experience of effectively being, sounds like, fired because you were deemed disabled? And what did you do with those feelings? Because I think Flexa materialized relatively quickly.
I went and sat on a bench outside and cried. I wasn't even allowed to go back in to get my stuff. Wow. So they brought my coat and my phone out to me, and everything else I had to leave, and they shipped it to me 2 days later. I had no idea what was going on because it was so, and again, it comes back to like commentary on what success is. Like I remember I've spoken about this a lot on social media, at events, etc. And there are so many people that are so quick to judge and say, maybe it was a performance issue, maybe it was you. Because it is very easy to assume that, right? And I just remember thinking, I thought I was being called into that room for a promotion. That was the conversation that was happening a few months beforehand. So for that to come out of nowhere, it was genuinely very, very shocking because I had no feeling that that was the case. And if it's a performance issue, like, people aren't stupid. You can feel it when you know that you're underperforming, you know.
Yeah.
And you are worried about it. And in that situation, you know, I would have done everything I could to get out of it. So I went and sat outside, sat on a bench, cried, called one of my best friends who, at the time, her dad was a judge and had started as an employment lawyer. So I was like, what do I do? She got her dad to call me, and then we ended up, on the sort of settlement trajectory. But while that was being sorted, I was put on gardening leave for 3 months. I couldn't work. Mm-hmm. I wasn't allowed to work for anyone else. And so for 3 months, I basically didn't really do anything because I couldn't, which is a very strange feeling. That's where the half Ironman came from, because I was like, what do I do with my time?
Because you didn't feel at that point, I need to solve this as a problem that I should solve.
No, not at that point. I then went into a career more in consultancy for a few years. And that was the point at which I met my now husband, who it was his idea, Flexa was his idea in terms of his experience. So he had been working at a company that was really flexible for like 5 years before that. And they were like 3 days a week in the office, 2 days a week at home. This was back in like 2013 through 2018. Unusual. Really unusual. And he was then thinking about leaving. And he was like, this is like the modern version of golden handcuffs. Like, how do I know? He's like, I don't need flexibility at all. Like, I don't have a reason for it, but I want it. And I should be able to command, like, to be able to access that if that's how I work best. And I was like, I totally agree. It's pretty nonsensical that, like, you can't filter out companies based on how they work, not just what they pay and what the job title is. So then we were talking And I was like, it's actually a really good, because he was like, could we change how people take that first step into looking for a company and filter that down? I was like, that's actually a really good idea. So he then decided to leave and just take a bit of time, because he'd been running the UK and Ireland business of Betfair for 5 years, which is, he was like, I want a break now. And I remember coming back one day after he'd done his final day there with a whiteboard and was like, I think this is a really good idea. You've got time. Why don't you run with it? And this was back in 2019. And then classic me, I was like, no, I need to be involved. So we went to the
Ambition
pub.
steps in.
Yeah, we went to the pub, we chatted through, and we were like, we actually think this could go somewhere.
It feels like an interesting partnership because he has the experience of having worked in flexible work, not for any particular like medical need, just because he wanted to, and your experience of literally being fired from a job because you wanted one day off. And so you were kind of two totally different potential customers, right?
Two sides of it, almost the B2B and the D2C. And then funnily enough, that actually flipped. Like I look after more of the B2B side and he looks more D2C. It was exactly that. And he had the experience of managing significantly bigger teams than I had. I'd always been more of an IC in my career. And so then we were like, well, we can't build it because he's now COO/CFO. I became CEO because of this kind of story behind it, and the kind of understanding of what I'd gone through, I think, was significantly more relatable as a story. And then we were like, well, we need to find someone to build this because we can't.
Technical operator.
Yeah. So then we found Tim, who's our technical co-founder, on Angel List, and we started building it and then launched it literally 3 weeks before the pandemic hit.
What was the, I mean, I have so many questions about the COVID experience, but before that, you find Tim on this list, you have no personal knowledge of who he is. What's the kind of interview questions that you wanted to know about Tim? Because I assume, you know, you would see his work, what he's capable of.
Yeah.
Were you asking personality questions so that you can see if you were goal matched, personality matched?
Goal matched, yeah, in terms of like, what do you want to build? Like, where do you want to be in life? You know, how do you like to work? But to be honest, we were all working on it for free. We were more like, if he chooses us, we're lucky. And thankfully it worked out. You know, we could see that what he could build was good. You kind of are walking into it. It's a pretty black box, right? If you don't know anything technical, like you talk about coding languages, I'm like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And so it was just a big leap of faith. And none of us had sacrificed at that point very much to do it. So like I had gone down to a 4-day week with the company that I was at, and then we were working on it on weekends. And then Maurice was contracting and then working on this on the side. And then Tim was doing an earn out at a place that he'd sold his previous business to. So we were like, well, we've kind of all got this time and it's low risk, and then we'll see if it works out or not. And thankfully it did. But, you know, whenever people ask me about starting a business, I'm like, put as little risk into it as possible and see if it has legs, because our business quickly gained traction where we got to about 10,000 users before we'd even considered leaving our jobs and considered getting funding and actually being able to run it full time. So we'd really done the kind of like proof of traction before that, which for us de-risked it hugely. And we knew that we could all work together well as well.
It's now been 5 years at Flexa. And how has that impacted or supported your relationship with your partner?
It's a really interesting one because you can look at it from two sides. You can see it from the side of the business, and from a business perspective, it's been literally couldn't have done it without him. And I think he'd say the same, because having somebody like, startups are incredibly demanding, particularly when it's VC backed and you've got millions of pounds and millions of people's expectations on you. That there were times where, you know, we'd be working on Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, and we've cancelled, honestly, I think about 5 holidays. And if I was doing that to somebody, or if he was doing that to me, like the amount of resentment that there would be, like, I think that's be incredibly difficult to survive. Whereas for us, it's like having somebody there that always gets it, can always help, and totally understands your experience. Whereas I think it's very unique running your own thing. And I don't think very many people do realise the amount of stress and sacrifice that comes with it. And the same as being a sole founder. I don't know how sole founders do it. It's incredible to have that level of stress and context switching and management all by yourself. I couldn't do that.
And consistent drive every day to do it. But then I guess the shadow, I would assume, would be you're always talking about work. When do you have a way that you kind of switch off? Is there a time? Is there a phones get put away at this hour? Is there any kind of, this is where our relationship begins and ends and the work begins and ends?
None. And some people are like, what? I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is this isn't forever. And we just have to give it absolutely everything while we can. And two is that we have tried sometimes to not talk about work on the weekends, not have phones on Sundays, actually do holiday weeks where we don't do any work at all, which we did for our mini moon, and I will never do it again, ever. And it just didn't work for us. Like, the way that we get through it is with two concepts of, well, there's work-life balance and there's work-life blend. Work-life balance does not work for us at all. Work-life blend works very well, where we'll be online 16 hours a day. But you can take the dog for a walk, you can go to the gym, we can go out for dinner, whatever it might be that you need to do. And same as on the weekends. If one of us is feeling overwhelmed, just doing an hour of work can then mean that actually our heads are clearer and we can go and enjoy something later on. So we've stopped trying to achieve any form of balance between our relationship and work. And actually that's been better, because I think it's an unsustainable, unachievable goal really for us.
Yeah, I feel the same about kind of working on weekends and evenings, whatever works for you, right? And I personally feel calmer when I've done some prep time and work on a weekend to prepare for my Monday. I don't want to wake up stressed. I don't want to wake up to 1,000 emails. I want to be on inbox 0 Sunday, and I want to like start fresh on Monday. You know, some people don't get that and see weekends very much as sacred time to switch off, which was also fine, but I would not, and my partner feels the same, like he would not feel calm and sort of happy and centered if that wasn't the case. So it's really interesting, and I'd like to kind of re-enter the conversation where we left off around COVID. So COVID comes. How did COVID affect the world of work? Because one would assume that kind of flexible time working from home is so much more commonplace, but then equally I know a lot of businesses that rolled back that offering. So what did COVID do for Flexa, and what is the status now?
Oh, it was absolutely terrifying when it happened, because you're like, what have I done? I've started a business in a global pandemic and things moved so quickly. But it was also obviously a brilliant time for startups, because the sort of barrier to starting was removed. Everybody was at home. All meetings were on Zoom. There was obviously a lot of startup capital around. So it was a very good time to start it. But from our specific perspective of how it changed the world of work, we basically went from 5 days a week being the norm to effectively pretty much the same structure, but just sitting at home. You know, everybody was like, I'm online from 8:30 in the morning, whenever it was, till 6:30 at night. And we just replicated being in the office to being remote. Then as we started to come back out again and companies started to think about what their correct sort of blend of remote and in person, because all the studies suggested that actually some form of blend was more productive. Exactly. Some remote and some in-person time is going to be different for each company. It's going to be different for each individual. And so companies had to think about where on that spectrum they sat, which meant way more differentiation, which for us, when we were trying to find out what kind of company is going to fit you, was brilliant, because 5 days a week in the office down to 4, 3, 2, 1, remote first, fully remote. There's so much variety. And then companies started to think about hours, because we kind of freed ourselves from this idea of like, oh my God, it's 9:03, I'm late for work, it's a disaster. When that wasn't really meaningful. It was about what work you did. So I think COVID really helped with challenging the idea of hours. And again, companies have chosen, is it set? Is it a bit of flex? Is it core hours? Is it fully asynchronous? And then because there was a level of flexibility with the majority of companies, they had to look a little bit further and be like, okay, how do I differentiate? How do I actually look different from my talent competitors? So looking at all sorts of like creative benefits, looking at how they described their cultures, being clearer about the kind of company that they were. So in terms of the journey that we went on, because companies can get discovered for all of those things, it was actually hugely beneficial for us, because we got to really shine a light into a company that was far beyond just you can work from home 3 days a week. It's like, we also have a dog-friendly office, shared parental leave. You can work from anywhere for a month a year. We have a really fast-paced culture, which might not be for everybody. Like actually building a brand similar to how a company would build a brand, but about what it was like to work there.
And so that's on the side of people trying to find interesting places to work. What can the workplaces do to build a more inclusive and diverse workplace in terms of who they bring in and how they treat them?
I think the first step is being transparent about what's on offer, because that ultimately, if you're giving people the information to make an educated and empowered decision about whether you're the right fit for them, that's the first step towards inclusivity. I think then being more aware of what you're measuring. So I think when we think about diversity and inclusivity, so often people automatically, erroneously think of, we need X proportion of people, or companies are striving to get to X goal. Whereas actually you need to measure it at every single stage. Like if you're not being seen or discovered by diverse talent, then you're never going to get them in. And so looking at who you're appealing to in terms of who's looking for your working environment, who's looking for the benefits that you have. Do you have good enhanced maternity leave if you're trying to get more women into the workforce? Fertility leave, menopause leave, like there's so many more steps to make it more inclusive. So looking at every single stage of the candidate experience through to the employee experience and being quite rigorous with data, which I do think is quite new in terms of that approach.
So I actually don't have a sponsor and there aren't any commercial breaks in this season. Instead, I wanted to use this little pause to say how much we would love to hear from you. We want to get to know our audience better. There are lots of different ways to practice slowing down and lots of different people and stories we can hear from. So please leave a comment or a review on this episode to share your thoughts. Tools you use to slow down, someone you'd like to suggest for the show, or just your thoughts on the episode. This really helps us plan future episodes and cover things that you might be interested in. Now, back to the show. And now that you've been running Flexa for 5 years, you probably have a plethora of anecdotal evidence of people's experiences on your platform, the kind of jobs that they've gotten. Are there any kind of stories and examples that come to mind that really moved you?
Thankfully, hundreds. We've got so many amazing examples of people that had struggled to find flexibility for years. They now work. So my favorite ones are when somebody finds a job and then they move companies and they move from one Flexa company to another one. We've had so many examples of that, of like somebody realizing, oh, actually, I wanted more time in the office and this was a fully remote company. So I ended up going to remote first. Or I'd always wanted to get a dog, but I couldn't afford doggy daycare for the days that I'd go into the office. And now I found a dog friendly company. Like there are so many wonderful examples of, and I don't want to say even on the smaller things, because I think there shouldn't be a big need or big justification for wanting flexibility or wanting a certain benefit or wanting a certain way of working. But even some of the smaller ones I think are really heartwarming. Like some people thrive, they're much more active, their brain's more awake in the evenings. Like I'm one of those people, and I hated starting work at 6:30 in the morning, and finding somewhere that I could start later was literally life-changing to me from a health and productivity perspective. And I've met loads of other people in a really similar position, because society is for morning people.
Yeah. I'm definitely not the like 5 a.m. club where it's like wake up an hour before you need to have this relaxing time. I'm like, I will wake up exactly at the time that I need to get the thing done. You also touched on something there that I'm interested in. Having an autoimmune condition means that where you say they classified you as disabled, that's an invisible disability to most people. And I think there is a level of confusion in our culture around people with visible and non-visible disabilities. And I have a number of friends that have non-visible disabilities. Has there been any experience that you've had around the label of disabled and it not being visible?
Yeah, I think in a lot of the conversations that I'd had between losing my job and then starting Flexa in interview processes, my autoimmune disease wasn't seen as a good enough reason. Like it didn't have the same gravity and validity as a physical disability. And obviously it is significantly less impactful than on my life than being in a wheelchair, for example. But I think my need for flexibility was very much questioned because people couldn't see it, so they couldn't understand it. So they assumed it was more of a nice to have than anything else, which I think, is a problem in society anyway, where, or particularly when we look at the old ways of working, where someone's like, I'd love to be able to have a dog and bring it into the office. And then you get that attitude of, that's ridiculous, dogs aren't for work. It's like, someone can want to do that if they want to. And there will be companies that offer that. And so I think what it tended to do for me was make me doubt myself and be like, am I expecting too much? Is this going to make me look less serious or less committed? And often the answer was sadly, yes. I was dropped from multiple interview processes. I had offers rescinded because I would never say that I had a disability in the application process, because there's so much data about how much it impacts whether or not you're going to be carried through the interview process. So yes is the answer. I think invisible disabilities or any form of...
Because you could be a carer. You could have somebody you need to care for at home that you need to be home by a certain time for.
Yeah. And so often, right, that affects women. I mean, invisible disabilities disproportionately affect women. Caring responsibilities disproportionately affect women. Obviously, childcare, household chores, all disproportionately affect women. And when we request for an environment to suit us better so that we can still do the same amount of work, it suddenly assumes that we're less committed or going to do less work just because we can't conform to the very traditional 8 till 6 in the office 5 days a week, as well as juggle everything else.
And what are your goals for Flexa? Like, do you have big ambitions for it? What would be the kind of cultural change that you're hoping to make?
The cultural change that I would love to see, and we're starting to see it in user behaviour, which is wonderful, is for us to be the first port of call when people are looking for a specific working environment. So they start our journey with us and they shortlist down the companies that then work for them. And obviously for us, that means getting to tens of thousands of companies so that there's enough variety. But from a cultural shift and a user behaviour perspective, that's what I'd love to see.
That would be great. I would love for that to be the case for you. You know, this podcast is about slowing down, which we haven't really touched on that much in your journey, because obviously it's really been about a mission. I think your mission helps other people to figure out and manage their time in ways that work for them. But in terms of your life, founder, as we discussed, in a relationship with your co-founder, how do you slow down in your day-to-day? Like, are there any tools, apps, tricks, things that really help you in the daily actions to kind of take a moment and figure something out?
The only thing that I do, and I do it very consciously, is if I can walk somewhere, I will. And same with on weekends, it'll be like activity is walking for like 6 hours, or I'll walk to the office later, even though it's 45 minutes and it's not efficient. But I think from a processing perspective, like slowing your brain down is so important to come up with ideas to work out what your next step should be. And so I've kind of forced it in by walking. If I can walk, I will. And to me, I think because I really struggle with being like, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm specifically not going to do anything, or I'm going to do something that I really enjoy. With walking, I at least feel like there's also a benefit of there's activity there as well.
Yeah. You know, I feel like this conversation has also been an interesting kind of journey into your understanding of success, from must go to Oxford, do this, to I have to kind of muscle my way past other women and to compete with these men in these masculine worlds, to now very much being in the startup world and building a business, which is the most kind of entrepreneurship in this country is very much like hustle, figure stuff out. What is your like working definition of success right now?
Where I want to get to, and that's when I will see myself as successful, is when I have genuine freedom. That's my biggest definition of success. Being able to be free to choose to do something, to choose to move somewhere, to choose to work one day or to choose to not work one day. That to me, obviously it's heavily linked to financial freedom, but it's also mental freedom, like feeling like I have succeeded and I don't need to prove myself anymore. Feeling like I can slow down if I want to or not. And that's the biggest definition of success for me, is freedom. You know, I don't have a desire to buy a £3 million house and that feel like freedom. I think to live somewhere that you love, to choose to work or not, I have a number in my head and it's not mental. It's not completely bonkers. And maybe that goalpost will change, but I don't think that it will, because I don't need to be flying in a private jet with my dog. I mean, it might be nice, but like, that's not freedom to me. It's being able to live a lifestyle where you don't want for anything that is relatively normal.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one with the finances. And you said earlier, you know, I'm conscious with my partner that we're in this sprint right now, and that now is the time to make this happen. And that is a kind of dichotomy or a paradox that I deal with on a daily basis. You know, how do you balance the ambition with this feeling of contentment and the idea of knowing that these are sprints that we have to do and there is a sort of like finish line? And for me, it's difficult with running your own business. I'm like, nobody else pays into my pension but me.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody else is looking out for my future but me. And I don't want to be 65 and doing what I'm doing now and working at the pace that I'm working now, right? So there is this paradox of I have to work really hard at this stage in my life and this age of my life in order to be able to, I don't just want to make, there's a slow down culture of like, you don't need this, you don't need this. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to just pay the bills, right? Because then that doesn't safeguard me in the future. I want to be able to put away for a pension, make some investments, have some savings, right? So in order to do that, I need to be working really hard right now.
Yeah. And then so you don't want that to be forever.
How do you contend with those two things?
I think it's about feeling your way through it. Like, you know, if you'd have asked me back in 2020 when we started Flexa, I'd have said, oh yeah, you know, we want a multi-million-pound exit in 3 years. The goalposts move, right? Some things are realistic, some things aren't. Some brilliant things have happened that we hadn't expected at all. Like being able to move to Devon and buy a lovely house. Like that wasn't something that we thought was going to happen in 5 years starting a startup. You know, I see us doing this for another few years, which is, you know, probably longer than I anticipated at the beginning. And it's about feeling your way through it and forcing yourself sometimes to evaluate it again. I think that's the really big thing, is how we've gotten comfortable with this idea in our head, and obviously my husband and I talk about what happiness and what contentment would be for us, but neither of us could say that we're super happy or content right now.
Right.
And it's about evaluating, like, are you happy with that being the case right now? But how long are we willing to kick the can down the road for and be like, you know, no, we're not content. We do want more. And I think it's about being very open with yourself. Like I have that conversation with myself very often. And obviously when I'm working with my husband, we have to have it together a lot. And being aware of that and then adjusting as needed after that. I don't think anyone's life plans turn out as you expect them to, right? And being comfortable with that change and being comfortable with that uncertainty and being resilient enough to deal with that, I think are all things that I didn't know I was going to have to sort of pull out of myself so often.
I think those kind of annual reappraisals where you kind of go through some checkpoints in your life are very helpful. I do them in January, and it's quite a good kind of reminder of where you're at. And you do a reappraisal of the previous year. How much time did I spend doing certain things? And is that really how much time I want to continue spending my time? Because we have a finite amount of time. Everything is an opportunity cost. And so, you know, do I need to have 100 friends? Do I want to spend more time with my family? Like, these are all important questions.
And different people are motivated by different things, right?
Yeah.
And I think being aware of what motivates you and what makes you happy. And I definitely am somebody that is massively motivated and gets happiness from achieving things. But not everybody will. Some people also get happiness and feel motivated by having true work-life balance, spending more time with their family, working on, you know, things that better themselves, whatever that might be. And so I think spending enough time being introspective and understanding what genuinely motivates you. I've got friends that love, like, really, really value total work-life balance and aren't financially motivated at all. That's totally up to them to choose. And I'm glad that that genuinely makes them happy, even though it wouldn't make me happy. It's just different.
Yeah, took me a long time to figure out that we are so different in that way, that the drive and ambition that I have is just not what other people have, and that's exactly as it should be. Otherwise, we'd all be founders. Yeah. And no one would be, but we'd have way too many companies. Yeah. Everyone would work for themselves. You know, there are people who much prefer to be the number two, people who love to be operational, people who want to work within a business that is so much bigger than them.
Which
and
is
then
so
people
needed.
who love to work in a cafe because they want to spend the rest of their time being creative, making music, doing their hobbies, and they just see work as a 6-hour shift that they just want to get through in order to get their fee to be able to spend the rest of the time living their lives. So,
and that variety is
necessary,
so crucial. Yeah.
Well, my last question is, and it's something I ask everybody, if I had to watch a film or read one book or go to see one piece of art that would help me better understand you, what would it be?
My biggest appreciation of culture is more about scenery, places, food, that kind of thing. My favorite place in the world is a beach down in the very, very west of Cornwall, and you have to climb down to it, and barely anybody is down there, although it did get TikTok famous about 2 years ago, which was such a shame.
The worst.
But there used to be nobody on it at all, and when the tide comes in, you basically have to run up and get back up it again, and it feels like literally the end of the earth. And I just sit there for hours, and it's so beautiful. It's like clear water, yellow sand, and just sitting and being in nature. That, I think, the reason I'd say of understanding me more, being able to go down there whenever I wanted and have that freedom, like, that is the success that I see.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on that we haven't covered, that you might be itching to say around this topic of slowing down, redefining growth and success for yourself, finding work that works for you?
I think the one thing that I came to terms with, and we've kind of touched on it a bit, is this idea. I think so many people see their lives as like sort of quite linear trajectories of like, I need my life to have these elements and then I'll be happy. Whereas actually different phases of your life can be totally different. Sometimes you can be working brutally hard to the point where you feel, overwhelmed, as you talked about. Then you can have a period of time of slowing down, taking time, taking a career break, doing some traveling, rather than trying to leave that all to the end of your life. And I think embracing the fact that there will be ebbs and flows, there will be peaks and troughs. You won't always be happy. You won't always feel discontented either. I think that's one way that humans should look at life. And I think it helps build a much greater understanding of yourself as well, because you can see how you handle yourself and whether you thrive in different situations, rather than constantly trying to achieve a certain mixture of elements in your life.
I think that's so true. I see my life almost as like a series of circles. Yeah. I have some real full circle moments, and then like another circle begins. Yeah. And I think even turning 30 felt like such a end of an era. My 20s were all hustle, career, growing my friendship network, traveling the world. I was constantly on a plane. I mean, I was doing 50, 60 flights a year. And my 30s have been a sense of grounding, not wanting to go months of no travel, and really building into partnership what it looks like to have a sense of place, build a home, potentially start a family. These are like completely different evolutions that you then have to go through, and then different people become important in your life, right? Like your teens and 20s are like you figuring out who you are. Then you go through this phase of, I have a child, that's now the most important thing. And then, my partner is now in the phase of realizing like, wow, my mother is important again because she's in, a later stage or even final stages of their life. So that totally reprioritizes your life.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people kind of look at different phases of their lives and they're like, oh, I wish I could be back in that phase. It brings me sadness that I don't have that level of freedom. And I think, it's natural to look at that. But I think also you have to have that variety. There has to be change. You have to be adaptable, because otherwise you'll constantly look back and be like, although almost nobody actually says, the 20s were the best years of my life. Most people say 30s, right? But I think it's having that awareness that change is good, and that actually, I think slowing down doesn't always have to exist and have to be at one certain time. It can be, I hope that I can do that in my late 30s. I don't know.
Yeah, same. I'm kind of looking forward to that moment. I'm trying to put it more in my day-to-day, in my weekly, but I'm kind of seeing a finish line on the horizon for this particular circle. And I have a friend that describes it as like 5 to 7 year circles. Yeah. That every 5 to 7 years we sort of renew in a different way. And maybe there's a kind of gap year or a sort of sabbatical at the end of each of those points where you can take a break.
Yeah, and I think that's one wonderful thing that's happened in the world of work and with COVID is like career breaks have become a bit more normalized as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's wonderful that people are like, I'll take 3 months between 2 jobs. Why not? Like, to be able to travel the world rather than waiting for a kind of end goal that you may never reach. And making sure that you're winding in those little experiences day to day as you go through different phases of your life.
Well, language is so important, right? This idea of like a career ladder, that the graph of your life has to be exponentially a curve that moves up, whereas I think taking away some of that language then frees us up to be able to take much more regular breaks and live by our own terms.
And for success and achievement to be measured in different ways as well. I think, again, that language of it's a career ladder implies that you always have to be moving forward, whereas sometimes it's fine to stagnate or to go backwards if you want to. And again, it's emotive language to even use the word stagnating. It sounds negative, whereas actually sometimes not wanting to progress forward is also completely right for you in that time.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. This episode was hosted and created by me, Tiana Tambridge. It was produced by Whitney Rosenthal. Sound and video recording, mixing, editing and mastering is by Brazen Studios. Cover art designed by Natalia Ruche. Please subscribe to The Slowdown to be notified of upcoming episodes, tell a friend and leave a review, because it really helps a new podcast like this get out there into the world. And remember, we're all heading to the same destination and there is no prize for getting there early, so we might as well slow down.